We are live. This is the first episode of the DodgerDan video podcast. Going to try to give you all a little bit more long form content that I feel like doesn't fit perfectly with the TikTok format. I feel like sometimes I want to go longer on certain topics, but I just don't have the right kind of avenue for that on TikTok. So hopefully you guys tune in, enjoy this content. Obviously, there's a lot of off-season stuff with the Dodgers going on right now that I hope to get into. So welcome in. Please subscribe. I may also post this up on Spotify and start using this as the launch space for the podcast, but nothing's formalized yet. Just trying things out, and I appreciate you all for joining along for the ride. And again, as we go on, I'll improve the production. Maybe if some of you guys can create some art for me or have cool sample music that I can use that's not copyrighted, I would love to include it as well. I feel like DodgerDan and this community has been very much bootstrapped, and part of I guess this growth has just been us growing together and enjoying the Dodgers. So hopefully I can be a voice that you guys enjoy, and we'll see where this goes. Let's see. The first thing I want to talk about is this offseason and where the Dodgers are going to be. So obviously our notable free agents include Teoscar Hernandez, Kike Hernandez, Blake Treinen, Walker Buehler, Jack Flaherty, Joe Kelly, and I may have missed a couple there, but I think those are like the big names. And one of the things that a lot of you have pushed back upon is me wanting Juan Soto. And I just want to be really clear about where I stand on this, and hopefully you guys can help. This can help understand a little bit where I'm coming from. So first of all, I think I am someone that is an implicit believer in change is good. I do think, obviously, that maintaining a winning team, maintaining a winning formula is critical to the success in the long term of any team. And you look at some of the most dominant teams throughout history of sports in general, there's always a core that is there that helps continue to propel the team forward. Now, I think the distinction I'm making is that players like Teoscar Hernandez and Kike Hernandez, although they are critical to the Dodgers, and although I think that they've probably had a greater impact on the Dodgers than anybody else, I do think that at some point, those players are replaceable in a way that Mookie Betts, Shohei Ohtani, Freddie Freeman are not. And when you talk about culture and a culture of winning, of course, Kike Hernandez is one of those guys. He is a cultural centerpiece of the Dodgers. And it sounds ridiculous to say that getting rid of him is going to be good for the team, but I think the reality is you put most major league players in this Dodgers lineup, they're going to thrive. They're going to thrive because there's no place for opposing teams to really attack the Dodgers in that way. They can't really hide because even as you saw many times throughout the playoffs, Tommy Edman was hitting ninth and he was the NLCS MVP. We have Kike Hernandez hitting ninth and he is one of the best players in October baseball. And so this sounds like a discrediting of what Kike has done, of what Teoscar has done, but I just don't think that they necessarily would have that same impact on other teams. And we've seen it. We saw Teoscar with Seattle, with Toronto. We saw Kike Hernandez and what he did in Boston. And again, it's hard to walk this line because it sounds like a slight, but it's just an objective, in my opinion, evaluation of our lineup and what our lineup does for other hitters. And so let's talk about the Juan Soto thing. I understand, again, the talk about his defense, let's say. Yeah, defensively, he's not great. But as I shared again in my post earlier this week, Teoscar Hernandez is also not great at defense. Just this year, Juan Soto had a 0 in defensive runs saved. Teoscar Hernandez had a -3. It's not an end-all be-all metric, but it is something to tell you that the defense of Juan Soto is actually better than Teoscar Hernandez. So that argument is not as strong. Now, you can say that right field is a more impact position than left field. Okay, you do have a point there. But at the end of the day, defensively, Juan Soto is not as bad as Teoscar. So then you look at offense. I think very clearly there, offensively, Juan Soto is much better than Teoscar. Even in a year in which Teoscar had his best offensive season, Juan Soto had maybe just an average season for him. It was better than Teoscar's. Lefty-righty, balancing the lineup. My opinion is that you have a player like Juan Soto, maybe you'll take an extra left-handed bat. Maybe it's okay to have a left-handed bat in there. That doesn't necessarily allow us to balance it, quote-unquote, as much, but we were pitching around Juan Soto, in all honesty, wanting to get to an Aaron Judge. So again, I don't know if that's as strong of an argument. The biggest criticism I've seen is this idea of culture, Juan Soto being about himself, Juan Soto being a cancer to the locker room, Juan Soto being another Manny Machado. If anything, this is the one that I actually reject the strongest, because I think it is an unfair characterization of a player that I think Dodger fans just have a lot of anger towards, or maybe a hatred towards, because of his affiliation with the Padres and what we think that means he is like as a person. People have brought up the fact that he's been traded multiple times in the last 3 years. To me, that just signals that he is someone that, one, other teams want, and two, because he is so good, other teams are not willing to spend as much to kind of get the services onto their team. This idea that he's going to get $700 million, I think, is a little bit unfounded. And the fact that fans are so angry at that number, I think, is working for Juan Soto and Scott Boras and his team, in that they're trying to drive the price up. Whether it's artificially inflated or not, they're trying to drive the price up, and it's working. Is he going to actually land at that number? I highly doubt it. And I agree with you. If it is for $700 million, Juan Soto is not worth that money. However, I am operating under the understanding that that won't be the final number. And so at some point, I think it's irresponsible for any team to not consider it, to not think about it. Because at some number, he is worth it. He is definitely worth it. No matter what you think he will be in the locker room, no matter what you think his impact will be to those around him, at some point, a talent like Juan Soto is worth that money. And so I think that's where it's Andrew Friedman's job to be able to figure that out. Back to the culture piece. I said this again in my earlier video, but if your culture is able to be broken by one player, I don't think you have that strong of a culture. In my mind, the culture of the Dodgers is built upon players like Clayton Kershaw, even in Austin Barnes, Miguel Rojas, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Shohei Ohtani. These guys are our cultural centerpiece, led by Dave Roberts, who I think we have seen, especially in this postseason and just throughout this season, a very difficult one with a lot of pitchers being in and out of the lineup, a lot of injuries to our position players as well. That is where the culture of the Dodgers is. And if you don't trust that, then I understand you thinking Juan Soto can break our culture and chemistry. I don't agree with that. I really do think that the Dodgers culture set by our leaders is so strong that Juan Soto does not have to come in and be expected to be a leader, which I think was the problem with his stint in San Diego, where I think they saw potentially he could be a leader, but he is a young guy. Even at 26, I still think that's pretty young relative to the ages of a lot of baseball players. And so I find myself in an odd position defending Juan Soto, but he's an extremely talented player that I think we can hide his defensive shortcomings. And the offensive output is just going to be so great that I do think it could be worth it. So again, I know you guys are tired of hearing about Juan Soto. I know you guys don't want to hear me yap on about him anymore, but I just, as a principle, reject this idea that we just don't pursue him because we think we don't need him. I think that is a very arrogant stance for the Dodgers team. I know we just won the World Series, but we could have very easily lost it in the first round to the San Diego Padres. And where would we be then? I think we're doing a lot of revisionist history. I think we are playing the results more than the process. And I think that's a dangerous place for any organization to be in. Just because you win the World Series does not necessarily mean that the process was perfect. We just performed better than other teams at the times that we needed to, which I think can be said about the Dodgers many times, in which we didn't win. Our process was good, but the results were bad. And so just because the results were good, I don't think that is a sign for us to rest on our laurels and stand pat. That's my last thing about Juan Soto for now, until we get more news. The other big news that came out is that the Dodgers are considering moving to a 6-man rotation. And I think this is a great idea. For the Dodgers, what this year has taught us is that we cannot have a lack of depth in starting pitching, because we just don't know when these guys are going to get injured. And I've criticized Dave Roberts, I've criticized the training staff, I've criticized Mark Pryor about this a lot, but it seems like the Dodgers have a greater propensity of players getting hurt than other teams. And I know that's probably not true, because I'm sure every fan base can say, well, we had XYZ player get hurt and that really derailed our season. I mean, even just looking at the Atlanta Braves, they had a ton of injuries, especially to their top players like Ronald Acuna Jr., former MVP. So I get that. But as a Dodger fan, I don't care about that. I just care about the fact that the Dodgers had an extremely high number of injuries, especially to our pitchers. Gavin Stone, River Ryan, Emmett Sheehan, Clayton Kershaw, Tyler Glasnow. The list goes on and on. Yoshinobu Yamamoto. And we do need to fix that. But a remedy to that, besides fixing that in the short term, is just getting more and more arms. And so I think having a 6-man rotation does help us preserve those arms a little bit better. I think that pitchers are less concerned about their numbers to drive their salaries. I think that baseball teams are a little bit smarter now, so they're not as focused on what is your win number, what are your total strikeouts, what are your total XYZ, but they look at much more as kind of comparing averages or looking at some of the deeper analytics to determine the value of a pitcher and deciding whether he fits their need. Because the reality is starting pitchers, they don't go deeper than 5 innings. They don't go deeper than 6 innings, especially if you play for the Dodgers. So I think this is smart. I think it helps us preserve our long-term depth and health of our pitching staff, as well as just gives us more opportunities to look at a bunch of different guys. I think if you're set into that 5-man rotation, there's a little bit of an expectation that those pitchers are going to get to go every 5 days. I think if you set the precedent from the beginning that, hey, we're going to be a very fluid starting rotation, people are going to get different days off. Yamamoto, for instance, does have a 6-day break versus a 5-day break for other pitchers. So just navigating through that, I think a deeper pitching lineup is going to help. And with that, I would love for us to get, number one, obviously, Roki Sasaki. And I talked about it in my video today. There are mitigating circumstances that may prevent Roki Sasaki from coming over. His Japanese team has not posted him. The reason for that is that they will get a lot more money for Roki Sasaki if they post him next season versus this one. But from what I understand, Roki Sasaki had some sort of handshake agreement, maybe a gentleman's agreement, that the team would post him when he wanted to. It seems like at this point, maybe they are reneging on that, or maybe that was never actually set in stone. So there is a little bit of he said, she said there. Ultimately, let's work off the assumption that Roki Sasaki does get posted. The Dodgers sign him. There's a high probability of that. And then the Dodgers go out and grab one of those left-handed arms, Blake Snell or Max Fried. Our starting rotation could potentially look like Tyler Glasnow, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Shohei Ohtani, Max Fried, Roki Sasaki, and then take your pick of who you want in there, whether it's Walker Buehler, kind of back into a starting role. I do think a lot of our injured arms won't be back yet next season, so remove kind of Gavin Stone, River Ryan, names like that. Maybe a Dustin May, maybe a Tony Gonsolin. We'll see. Probably Tony Gonsolin will be healthy enough to play. I think there were some rumors that were true about him potentially coming back into playoffs. It did not happen, but it could have happened. So it will be interesting to see. But what I think I want Dodgers fans to understand is that the way we got through the postseason this year is not the way that we want to play. It's not ideal. Although we have a shorter kind of leash for starting pitchers. One, I think Dave Roberts has shown that if the starting pitcher is rolling, he's not just going to pull him. Maybe instances in the past that has been the case because of our over-reliance on analytics, but I've seen Yoshinobu Yamamoto go 7 innings. I've seen Tyler Glasnow go 7 innings. So even Jack Flaherty in this playoffs went 7 innings. So I don't think it's like this blanket, we are not going to have a pitcher pitch more than 5 or 6 innings. But I do think if it is possible, if we have the pitchers to do that, I think we would like to do that. I think we'd like to preserve our bullpen arms as much as possible, but also not have an over-reliance upon them. I can promise you next year, if the Dodgers are fully healthy, we will not be running any bullpen games. That is not the desire. That is not the vision for any baseball team, especially the Dodgers. So 6-man rotation sounds good to me. I do hope to see some news maybe towards the middle of next week, towards us actually moving towards signing one of these pitchers. So we'll see what happens, but it's all good stuff for the Dodgers, and I'm excited to see what happens with that. Other headline that came out yesterday, Mookie Betts moving to the infield. What does that mean for our team? So Unfortunately for me, I think that means that Gavin Lux is out. And I'm actually a little bit surprised at how quickly people have kind of given up on Gavin Lux. I know there are circumstances around that have been part of the reason. One, he was supposed to be a shortstop and couldn't do his job there. And so he had to switch with Mookie Betts, went to second base. And then I think defensively was all right. I'm actually going to look up right now what Gavin Lux's defensive run saved was this year. Let's look up. Bear with me, y'all. This is good radio, good podcasting right here. Let's see. So -2. So for those of you who think he's been awful or bad, you're right. He was not good defensively. But again, he's playing out of position a little bit, and the beginning of the season was rough for him. But I thought I saw signs at the end of the season that were pointing towards him figuring it out. And I'm personally just not a fan of giving up on talent that good so quickly. Having a cost-controlled, solid infielder like that is just money in the bank for a team. So I want to keep him. That being said, I think the Dodgers are having to toe that line of win now versus continue to build a solid foundation for the future. I do think these next 3-4 years, we really do need to win like 3 championships, because Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman and Shohei Ohtani are not necessarily like spring chickens. They're still going to be quote unquote in their primes, but age gets you quickly. I think age is not a linear growth curve, but I do think there's some level of dramatic drop off at some point. Ideally, you would have this gradual decrease that you can kind of measure that. But with sports, it's just sometimes you just wake up and you don't got it anymore. So I do think there's going to be a big push from the Dodgers to try to win as many as they can in the next 4 or 5 years, which is why I do think a Soto makes sense, because even if that latter half of the contract is bad, if we win 5 World Series in the next 5 years, I think we'll be okay. So that being said, I think Gavin Lux may be moved. That brings up the question again of like, who's going to replace him? Now, we do have a lot of options in the minor leagues. I'm looking at a Dalton Rushing, Jose DePaula. We also have Eduardo Quintero, Zaire Hope, who's been making a lot of noise. Let's say we re-sign Teoscar. He'll handle left. I'm assuming center field will be Andy Pages. The Dodgers may try to go again for the James Outman experience, which, again, I might be a sucker for this. I do think it's worth at least giving him a chance again. James Outman showed a lot of promise his rookie season. Obviously, last year did not start out good or well. He got sent down, but the talent is there. Defensively, very, very solid. Much better than Andy Pages. And I know people are going to say, what about that outfield assist, blah, 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 and the NLCS. Look, I just think that James Outman is a better defender in center field. I think Andy Pages is fantastic for a left or right, but in center field, I just felt more comfortable with James Outman out there. But a lot of rumors that point to James Outman being traded as well. So Andy Pages in center. And then you have who's going to be in right field. This is why I think Soto is definitely a target, because that is his position. But maybe Dalton Rushing can transition out there. He was playing left field, I think, at the end of his minor league season last year. So maybe he can handle that spot. Maybe you put Edman in center if we go ahead and do sign a shortstop. Edman can run center and then Pages in right. But ultimately, again, where we land is the Dodgers are in a really strong position where we just have a lot of flexibility to kind of do what we need to do, whether it's make moves, stand pat. We will have a fantastic Major League roster next year. But I think for the Dodgers, it's not having just a solid lineup, but having the best team in baseball to go for another championship next year. So it will be interesting to see. I know many of you, again, are not happy about the Mookie Betts news, but I think it's one of those things where we want to try and maximize as much space as possible in our lineup for awesome players. And as maybe Friedman is kind of signaling the same thing as all of you, maybe we don't view Gavin Lux as an awesome player. And so moving, even if it's out of position for Mookie, there to bring in another awesome player, it is better for us overall. Which, again, Mookie Betts is not necessarily out of position there. He started out in the infield, moved to the outfield with Boston, was fantastic, has won Gold Gloves. Last year, tried it again, didn't work out, but this is why Mookie's the man. This is why he's one of the best players in baseball. Anywhere you put him on the field, I think he's still a plus. Last year, before the season started, he was at the top of every best second baseman in baseball list kind of thing when we thought he was going to play second base. So ultimately, where I land is trust Andrew Friedman, trust this team. They have guided this ship immaculately since they've taken over, and I have no reason to doubt them, and I don't think Dodger fans should as well. So Dodger fans, be locked in. A lot of fun stuff happening this offseason. I think this team is going to look very different, but I don't think you should be afraid of that. Again, change is good. Change is inevitable. The core, being the core, is what's going to carry us anyway, so we don't have to be too afraid. Also, thanks for locking in. Hopefully, I'll be able to continue to push out really good episodes. I'm going to try to do more of this, a little bit more long-form content. I'll try to do a little bit more maybe picture-in-picture, show you guys what I'm looking at, and not just a straight talking to you, but hopefully, this is a good start. Please subscribe. Maybe set your alerts. I'll try to be as consistent with this as possible. I would commit to you 2 a week, but maybe go daily just to make sure you guys can get your fix of Dodgers in a little bit of longer format than what I might be able to provide on my TikTok. So, again, appreciate you all. Appreciate you helping me grow DodgerDan to what it is. I can't wait to continue to bring you great content over the offseason and into next season when we defend our World Series championship. But I'll see you guys, whether it's on TikTok, whether it's on YouTube. I'll try to post more on Instagram as well. But that being said, everyone, have a great Thursday. Peace out. As always, go Dodgers.